I think there's a lot of ways that you can get feedback. Um, Sometimes it starts with just figuring out an elevator pitch for what it is you're building. And when I say elevator pitch, I don't mean, Uber for whatever. I think that's like the classic, use a bunch of buzzwords. In my mind, an elevator pitch is saying in a sentence or two in plain human English the thing you're trying to accomplish and how you're trying to accomplish it. And it needs to be in a simple enough way that you could say it to your grandmother and she would not only understand what you're trying to do, but get excited about it. It's kind of hard. It's really hard to come up with that sort of elevator pitch. Oftentimes, when you'll talk to people and they'll talk about the thing they're trying to create, it'll be a multi-paragraph. Here, let me tell you what I'm trying to build. I'm trying to make this app, and this app's going to do this, and it's going to do this other thing and that other thing. And the problem is, when whisper down the lane inevitably happens, that message gets confused. And so then it becomes harder for you, even yourself, to understand what it is you're trying to build. Whereas if you can distill that down into a simple statement, it's much easier to share that idea with others, get that feedback from others, and make sure that everyone's kind of aligned on what it is you're trying to accomplish. If you leave it nebulous, then the feedback you're going to get is nebulous. Someone will take a look at what it is you're talking about, and they'll have a different idea in their head of what you're building. And so then when you finally build it and put it in their hands, they'll be like, oh, when you told me you were building X, Y, and Z, I thought you were building this thing, but now I see you're building this other thing. And so then that's where you can find yourself even in a market that you didn't intend to be building into. So I think it starts with your messaging when you're trying to figure out feedback. And then you then need to distill down the smallest possible thing you could build that is in line with that elevator pitch. The tiniest thing, ideally something that you could easily build in less than a month and put it in the hands of real users. And there's always that fear of wanting to put it in front of real users. Usually you'll start with yourself, you'll start with other stakeholders who you know, but at some point you do have to find users to put it in their hands. And because you don't want to wait until the thing is perfect, because it'll never be perfect. But you don't want to wait until you've spent a ton of time building something and then you try putting it in front of thousands of users all at once, and then they bounce hard off of it. If you're, to some extent, if you're going to disappoint someone, you want to disappoint one or two users, right? And see where their expectations about the thing you built misaligns with what you intended to build. So getting that feedback early, and then when you're doing it with one or two users, there's always the opportunity there to level set with them and say, look, this thing's still a work in progress, but you're getting a sneak peek, you're getting a white glove service, we're giving you a taste of this new platform that's coming down the pipe. And then you're able to get, actually, in many cases, you can get more buy-in from those users, because now those users know, well, I'm going to provide feedback, and my feedback is directly going to influence the development of this product. And now you have someone who is more passionate about your product. They want to see you succeed because they want to be a part of that success. And so I think getting into that kind of feedback loop with your users will allow you to start even getting evangelists for you and kind of hopefully get used to that sort of flywheel effect that a lot of people want anyway. And all the while getting feedback that's not your own. I think the one challenge with feedback is engineers and entrepreneurs, we often embrace change in a way that real users don't. We're often open to trying new things and going down new paths. And so oftentimes when we're building something, we're like, oh, I obviously would want to use this, so every user in the industry wants to use it. It's like, well, you're an entrepreneur. You kind of think differently than the average user. And so it is critically important that the feedback you get isn't just from other entrepreneurs or engineers, but from real live users who maybe agree that what you're building is better than what they're doing today. And what they're doing today probably is, I'm doing it in a spreadsheet, right? Like I figured out a bunch of formulas to figure out the thing I'm doing. And they'll say, well, what you're building is better than what I'm doing today, but I understand my spreadsheet. I'm comfortable with it, so I'm not going to change. And it's like, well, wait a minute, you just told me what I'm doing is better, but now you're telling me you don't want to change. And it's like, well, because even if you have no other competition in the market, your competition is human laziness. So the thing you're building has to be better than that. And the only way you're going to find out where that threshold is is if you're actually testing on real users. A lot of products start with solving a problem. That's where a lot of people start their ideas from. And often when you're starting a problem as a business, you already are probably doing this manually. And so I think it's important to have an understanding of what are those manual processes you're doing. And the question is, well, what are you building it for, right? If you're building something that is just going to be something you're going to use as an add-on to your existing client base, and you have customers and those customers come into your office and you're just looking for a companion app or something like that to help you. Well, that has a finite level of scale, right? And so you can often then find ways to just automate and speed up the thing you're doing, which is what oftentimes technology does. Technology takes something that we do as humans manually and makes it faster. When it comes to then scaling, if you are trying to scale, then the question is, well, at what point does there are going to be certain manual processes that you're doing that take you 2 seconds, and you don't even think about them because your thought is, well, that's not the problem, that's not the thing I need to automate. And as you scale, what ends up happening is you scale the things that are painful first, and you automate those things that are painful first, and then all of a sudden those manual things like sending a certain type of email or invoicing on something, things that maybe felt easy or didn't take too long before, now all of a sudden that becomes your pain point. That becomes the thing that you're trying to automate. And so you kind of hit those walls as you go. When you're starting from a no-code position, it's often important to have a good understanding of what those things are. So if you can codify those manual processes in something like a spreadsheet and do it with formulas, or at least just have your process documented out. Think about if you were to hire a new employee, if you were to bring in an intern or a very junior, fresh out of school individual who's going to take over doing some of the things that you do manually, how would you document that? And just the exercise of doing that kind of documenting of what are my processes and things that I actually do day in and day out will start to help you understand, if you are building a product that is just automating something you're doing manually, well, what are those things you're automating? I think there's this temptation that the thing you're building is not good enough. And when you have an idea and you say, oh, well, it's a good idea, but I don't think other people will realize the genius of what I'm making, or I don't think it matters enough to the world. So I'm going to add on more features, and then I'm going to add more features. I'm going to keep adding on features until all of a sudden the thing I'm building is compelling enough that others are going to get excited about it. And I think that's a dangerous approach to take. If you take that approach, the more complicated your product is, the harder it is to build, the more cognitive load it puts on not only the engineering team in terms of all the things they have to keep in their brain as they're building, but also on you, your other stakeholders, your customers. The more complicated that tool is, the harder it is going to be to train people on how to use it. Coaching people in your company, if you're hiring new employees, coaching them on the thing that you're building. It means that when there will be bugs in that application, the harder it will be to find those bugs, to fix them. It just causes so many problems that will make it harder for you to innovate in the future. And so I think it's really important to distill down your idea to something that solves that problem in as little effort as possible. Ideally, your product, whatever mission it is you have, whatever problem it is you're trying to solve in the world, ideally the thing you're building can do that in as little effort, as little code, as few features as humanly possible. That's not to say those other features aren't important. That's not to say the long-term version of your product has those features. But if your idea only works by having all those features, that's a pretty dangerous place to start from. Products that have that low barrier to entry always have, it's all about friction. The more friction that the product has when a user starts using it. And the lower friction you have, the easier it is for people to get to that value, right? The mindset of, you see this in like video games sometimes, or books or movies, like, oh, it gets good eventually. It's like, oh, if you can just get past the first half of the movie, eventually the movie gets good. Or, if you just, in video games, like, oh, if you get past the first 10 hours of the game, like eventually the game gets really good. That bounces on users so hard. And so that's also where the fewer features you need in order to give value to the user, the better. Because you want as low friction as possible. You want a user to get in there and see that value as quick as humanly possible. And it's a combination of features and also design. It's easier to have a well-designed product when you don't have complex features being the startup cost for it. A good example recently probably would be Wordle, maybe, since that's kind of the buzzword of the day is Wordle. And that's an example of a game that was just distilled down in such simplicity that within a minute anybody understood exactly what they were trying to do. And the game didn't ask too much of you. It wasn't, hey, there's the 5-word version and the 5-letter version and the 12-letter version and the 7-letter version. No, there's only one version of it. Like maybe if this was a product, you could say, okay, well, maybe the next feature will be you can play it multiple times a day, or you can have 12-letter versions, or there's, we'll add another color. So in addition to, green and yellow for indicators, there's some other color that, I don't know, tells you you're not even close, or maybe that a letter repeats, right? Because the game doesn't tell you that a letter repeats. So maybe there needs to be a color for that. All these extra features unnecessary. They're going, even if a player plays that game and they guess a letter, they guess a word, and they get a green and a yellow and a purple, and purple is supposed to mean that letter repeats or whatever is correct, but it repeats. You've now added complexity to what the user has to understand, and you're going to increase the likelihood that they'll bounce off. And it seems like maybe there's value there, and I've heard people complain like, oh, like the game doesn't tell you that you repeat letters. And it's like, did that really matter though? Right? Did the product really need that extra feature? So I think Wordle is a good example of taking an idea and distilling it down to its pure essence of just simple value and not asking too much of the user, not asking for a ton of commitment. It's asking for, a couple minutes a day, and isn't asking you to come back in an hour or a half hour. You're done for the day and you get to move on. Even like some little things like the sharing features. When you click share on that, it's copy and pastable simplicity. It's not like, oh, you can share it to Facebook and that's different than sharing to Twitter and let me put all the icons. Just share. There's a share button. That's all it does. When you guess letters and those letters are wrong, it grays them out on the keyboard. Right? So to do that, they had to overlap the keyboard, which is actually a more complicated feature because now you're not just relying on the native keyboard on your phone or on whatever device you're on, but now it has to replace that keyboard with its own keyboard and gray out the letters that are no longer valid. It's actually a little bit more effort, but that effort is put towards simplicity for the user because you're lowering that friction even more. The user can see right on that keyboard which letters they shouldn't waste their time even looking at. And so I think Wordle is a good example of really distilling down value into something that is minimal friction. And sometimes it's hard to see those. It's like I think the classic example is the eraser on the back of a pencil. It's such a simple design that just makes so much sense that people don't notice it. They use it every day and they don't think about it. And some of the best designed products in the world are that way, where you ask me like name products that are, have that level of simplicity and ease of use and low friction. And it's really hard to imagine them because there's so many of them out there, but they're just so good at what they do that you don't even notice them as you pass through them in your everyday life. And ideally, that's what you want. You want your design to be so simple, it's almost a utility in the user's life. And it just seamlessly weaves into their life. And now, that's how you can end up with a product that just kind of ends up being everywhere. It's really hard, though, to do that. A common question that I think I've gotten my whole career, and it's not just founders or clients, it's every single project I've ever worked on in my 15 years as a software developer. It's how long is this going to take? And I think the problem there is we as human beings think we have good prediction of the future. Honestly, if you're building something worthwhile, it's kind of an R&D effort, and you're not really going to know how long it's going to take. And the longer it's going to take, conceptually in my brain, the longer I think about how long something's going to take, the less accurate my prediction would be of that. And the agile software industrial complex that has formed since agile was formed, the original mantra of agile was very simple. It's a simple set of rules for fast iterative development. But it turned into a lot of complex processes around providing estimates and level of efforts and point values and complexity, and it kind of slowly has backslid into traditional waterfall development. And I think the reason why is because uncertainty is scary. People, human beings, do not like uncertainty. And in today's modern world, when we feel afraid about something, our instinct is to reach for planning. We think that if we can do more planning, that will reduce our anxiety around uncertainty. And it works. The problem is we're very poor at planning. And so then the question becomes, well, what is the solution to that? And I think that's where the solution is getting back to the pure original goals of the Agile Manifesto. If you search that online, you can find it's very 90s looking website. It's still out there, but a lot of those original principles of Agile are still relevant today. And it's all about build something very small as quickly as you can and then iterate. And that doesn't, on the surface, it doesn't sound like that answers that question of how long will something take. But I think if you get in that mode of, well, let me just go take a week and build something for you, and then we'll take a look at it a week from now, and then I'll go spend another week, and I'll go spend another week. You'll never be able to get a good plan in the future, but you will be able to sort of get that finger to the wind gut instinct that we're moving in the right direction, we're building the right thing, and we're moving at a pretty good pace. And so I might not know exactly how long it's going to take until this thing is ready to launch with real users, but just at the speed and pace that this team is working, I know it's not going to be a year. I know it's not going to be 2 weeks either, right? But at least I'll know, hey, if it's a month from now or 2 months from now, when I finally say, you know what, it's good enough, well, then that becomes a business decision and not an engineering decision. And so often what I try to get clients that I work with, I try to get them thinking in 1 month iterations, where we're trying to build something that can easily be accomplished in less than a month, that solves a real problem that would be in production in less than a month. And that starts day one of the project. That's not something like, oh, eventually we will get to this iterative process, but first let's go build your MVP, which is going to take 6 months. It's day one of the engagement is build something in less than a month that can be deployed that does something meaningful. Probably doesn't solve all your problems or answer all your questions, but it'll be in production, it'll work, it'll be something that could be put in front of users. And then do that for another month, and do that for another month. And so then when it's finally ready, because it'll never be perfect, but when it's finally ready to start testing on real users and putting in front of real users, that becomes more of a business decision and not an engineering decision. And the problem with how long it takes is that kind of then backslides into that mantra of like buying clothes online. I'll just, buy this item of clothing, have it sent to my house, and it'll be perfect. And it's like, well, no, you'll get it to your house, you'll try it on, and it won't fit right. And it's never going to be, and then you're going to maybe have to get it tailored, right? If you didn't have a choice to buy more than one, right? You have to get it tailored. You have to go send it back and then have another one sent. And so this very linear thinking of I can just lay out all my plans early and have them solved and know that in a very clean roadmap it'll be done, I think is a recipe for disaster. And so changing your mindset to, well, what could I easily accomplish in less than a month? And let's start there and then iterate, I think solves that problem in the right way for most clients. And they don't really want to hear that. They don't want to hear it as, oh, it's a relationship that will last for a certain amount of time, and then whenever I'm comfortable with ending the relationship, that's when we can just put the app in maintenance mode and move on. They more want to see it as a transaction. Oh, here's my roadmap of features. I'm going to give them to you. You're going to tell me when they're done. And once you're done, it's like buying that item of clothing. Our relationship's over and I'll walk away. And then there's that splash of cold water moment when they realize, oh, it doesn't fit right. Oh, and now like if I actually want the thing to behave the way I want, now we're going to have to do this back and forth. And if the engineering process wasn't set up for that back and forth, for that iterative process, well, now there's this awkward, well, we had this plan, but now the thing I need built doesn't fit into that plan. So does that mean we need to create a whole new roadmap? So does that mean we need to sit in a room with whiteboards and come up with a whole new roadmap of features and requirements and all these things and spend all this? And then it kind of becomes a stressful nightmare trying to solve that.